Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're looking at the AMD Ryzen 5 7400F. You've probably heard of the 7500F, a 6-core 12-thread socket AM5 CPU, available for less than £150 or dollars. Well, this seems to be pretty much the same thing, albeit with a lower 4.7 GHz boost speed and slightly reduced price. Availability seems to be limited to China. There's plenty on AliExpress, with the occasional chip appearing on eBay as well, and that's where I found mine. I paid 103 Great British pounds pence sterling for this one, roughly 35 quid, less than the cheapest 7500F. There isn't much out there regarding the 7400F, but as I said, it shares the same 3.7 GHz base clock, core count, 32 MB L3 cache and PCIe 5.0 support as the 7500F. It seems that the only difference is the 4.7 GHz versus 5 GHz boost speed, but wait, there is more. According to a couple of articles I've read, AMD used thermal paste between the CPU die itself and the heat spreader instead of solder, which of course raises temperature concerns, so that's something we should address first. I slapped a cheap Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE cooler on the 7400F for my tests today, a decent low-cost solution. Several hours of CPU testing and gaming later, and I can report the highest temperature I saw was 83 degrees. I used an open test bench with no extra fans, and all BIOS settings were left at auto. While this temperature isn't problematic, I'd probably avoid using a Wraith Stealth cooler, for example. By comparison, the highest temp I saw from the 7500F was 69 degrees. Nice. When gaming, especially in GPU limited scenarios, both CPUs will run cooler, but the 7400F will still exceed 70 degrees. Speaking of which, let's talk about gaming. If you're tempted by the 7400F, then you'll likely be looking for a sensibly priced graphics card to pair it with. I've gone with the RTX 3060 Ti to start with, but we'll be testing with a more powerful GPU as well momentarily. The 3060 Ti is an 8GB card that still offers excellent performance at 1080p and won't be held back by the 6-core 7400F. Most of the time anyway. There will be the occasional exception, like in the busiest areas of Red Dead Redemption 2 or Cyberpunk 2077, but honestly, I think this is a nice pairing. If the price difference isn't too significant, however, then I'd be inclined to opt for the 7500F, simply for peace of mind when it comes to the temperatures, but there were no issues with the 7400F hitting its 4750 MHz boost clock today, at least not with this Thermalright cooler, which by the way cost me less than £20 brand new on Amazon. I think it's a decent processor, to be honest, but as I said, if the 7500F is similar money or is only a little bit more and still within your budget, then that would make more sense. Before we throw some 7500F comparisons up, let's look at how the 7400F pairs with a more powerful GPU at 1440p. I've opted for one of my favourite 40 series cards, the 4070 Super. This 12GB GPU is still very capable for higher resolution gaming, and in pairing with this low-cost AMD processor, it produces some decent results. At 2560 by 1440, the card is reaching its maximum potential most of the time, but there may be a few more instances where we are CPU limited. This probably isn't the most realistic real-world pairing, but it's interesting to see one of the lowest cost AM5 offerings work well with a card of this caliber. Now you're probably wondering though, how does the 7400F compare to the 7500F, a CPU with a slightly higher 5 GHz boost clock? Well, for these on-screen results, I paired both chips with a 16GB 5070 Ti. First of all, we have Cinebench 2024. The multi and single core scores went from 791 and 100 respectively with the 7400F to 840 and 110. This performance difference will be noticeable in, say, DaVinci Resolve, where rendering a 1 minute 1080p 60fps video took 38 seconds on the 7400F but 34 with the 7500. For the gaming tests then, I paired both chips with 32GB of 6400MHz DDR5 as well as the 5070 Ti. I ran each game at 1080p to better highlight any CPU limitations. I'm expecting similar results, or at least I was because I know the results, but let's take a look at them. So to start with, we have Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p Ultra. For the 7400F, highlighted in pink here, we saw 99 FPS on average with a 1% low of 59. The 7500F, highlighted in blue, saw an average of 108 with a 1% low of 65. This is one of the more CPU intensive games that we tested today, so it's one where we're probably going to see the biggest difference. That and CS2, of course, whereby we saw 285 and 107 with the 7400F and 322 and 137 for the 7500. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 exhibited about 4 frames per second difference with 144 and 108 compared to 148 and 113 respectively. So there's more of a difference here between the 1% low than there was with the average. So it's a tiny bit more consistent, but this isn't really a difference that you're going to feel when actually playing. Red Dead Redemption 2 at Ultra was basically identical. In fact, the 7400F hit 121 FPS compared to 120, but this is within margin of error territory, especially when we look at that 1% low. It's basically the same performance. Both of these chips performed very similar to each other, so either one is a good choice, and that I think goes for all of the results so far from a gaming perspective. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 then, again, a very small difference when it came to that average. The 7400F actually gave us a better 1% low, 82 compared to 78. So either chip is going to give you a decent gaming experience at 1080p Ultra here. And finally for GTA 5 Enhanced 1080p with a very high RT preset, 133 and 74 compared to 137 and 76. So again, minimal differences here, nothing that you're going to really notice when actually playing the game, but it's clear to see that the 7500F is of course that little bit better, and I put that down to the better boost clock speeds. But there we are, the 7400F from AMD, a 6-core 12-thread chip, is a respectable low-cost option for those wanting to build an AM5 PC, and perhaps you don't have a huge budget to do so. If the 7500F, however, isn't too much more expensive where you live, then I'd suggest going for that, as you can probably get away with an even cheaper cooler or a stock AMD one if you have one from a previous build. It's nice to see minimal performance differences in a lot of games between these two chips, and the difference could probably be made up with overclocking. This is something we'll have to test another time, but for now I hope this AMD 7400F impressions/review video was helpful. Be sure to leave your thoughts down below, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.